I thought owning a lake cabin meant tranquility. You know, coffee at sunrise, peaceful evenings, maybe the occasional wave from a neighbor. But what I actually bought was a front row seat to a slow-motion takeover by clipboard-wielding control freaks. One of them literally sold my house out from under me. And I'm not speaking metaphorically. I mean actual strangers on my porch, measuring steps like they already owned the place. And I never even put it up for sale. If that sounds unbelievable, just wait, it gets much worse. Ever had a moment of calm, only to watch it get tagged with a price and listed online? Tell me what you would have done. 2 years ago, if you'd told me I'd end up locked in a battle with the head of the neighborhood committee, I would have laughed and poured another coffee. Back then, the word HOA felt like something that happened to other people, not the kind of thing that could dismantle your entire life. I was too busy trying to piece myself back together after a divorce that hit harder than I'd ever admit. Danielle, my ex, had a talent for turning words into blades. "You're a good guy, Alex," she said, as she stood in our living room, her bags already zipped. "You just never stand up for anything. You're like a paper towel in a hurricane." She said that in front of our couples therapist. I remember the silence that followed. Dr. Peters cleared his throat, but I couldn't move. Danielle stood and walked out. I didn't stop her, just watched. Sometimes I still hear her voice when I hesitate. You let people walk all over you. And to be honest, she wasn't wrong. Most of my adult life, I avoided conflict. Even when my old landlord jacked up my rent without notice, I just nodded and accepted it. Like a coward, I wanted peace more than I wanted fairness. But peace becomes a cage when you're too scared to stand your ground. That's what led me to the cabin I weathered. Little place with chipped white trim and a lopsided welcome mat, but inside, it was mine. The old recliner by the window still held the shape of me from that first night, when I cried myself to sleep watching Frasier. The coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Man" had somehow survived the divorce. Danielle had tossed it in the box like it was a joke, and the bookshelf. Every unread title I'd once promised myself I'd finish stood neatly in a row. In this place, no one expected anything, no one judged. The scent of pine and paper filled the air. A faded photo of me and my dad fishing hung beside the door, his arm around me, my grin way too big. I'd hung it that first night to remind myself I wasn't always broken. Even the rickety kitchen table mattered. It was where I signed my divorce papers, where I scribbled out my first Fresh Start grocery list, where I wrote goals like take daily walks and make eye contact with the neighbors. The lake helped. Every morning, the rising sun felt like a quiet promise you get to try again. And for a while, that was enough. The neighbors were friendly, but not overbearing. Bill, the 70-something widower next door, waved every morning as he walked his ancient golden retriever. Mrs. Park often offered cookies left over from her bake sales, even though I barely stopped long enough to chat. One Saturday, we had a laid-back barbecue down by the dock. Burgers, corn, cheap beer, and small talk. Someone joked that the old HOA president was allergic to fence paint. At least she didn't have a thing about mailboxes, Bill quipped. And everyone laughed. That was the first time I heard how intense HOA rules could be. I didn't think much of it. Then Sharon Mitchell moved in. She bought the sleek grey house at the end of the road and became HOA president by default. The following month, no one else ran. I remember opening the door one morning, still groggy, and there she was, business suit, heels, and a bright yellow measuring tape stretched across my yard. I blinked at her, confused. "Can I help you? Your grass is 2 inches above regulation," she said, not even glancing up. Was this woman serious? Was I being Her tone was flat, but her hands shook like she was barely containing something. I laughed, genuinely unsure. "Ma'am, it's a lawn, not the master's." She stared at me. "Rules are rules, Mr. Thompson." Click. Pen cap snapped on. I remember thinking she looked more like a courthouse clerk than a neighbor. As she walked off, I wasn't sure if I should be annoyed or worried. That night, I spotted her again standing under a street lamp across from my place, measuring another neighbor's mailbox. It was late, no clipboard, no witnesses, just her writing in a notebook. It didn't feel like rule enforcement, it felt compulsive, maybe even a little sad. Over the next few weeks, Sharon was everywhere. Her influence seemed to grow by the day cameras popped up on her porch. Then came a laminated list of rules on the HOA board. People chuckled awkwardly, but no one pushed back. One morning, I made a joke in the group chat, "What's next? Measuring our air quality." No one responded, not even Bill. That silence felt colder than February lake water. I trimmed my lawn, bought regulation mulch, painted the porch twice. Somewhere inside me, the fear of confrontation had reawakened. Still, I clung to the peace, told myself, just go along with it, it'll pass. But one evening, I sat on the porch with a beer, watching Sharon move between homes with her flashlight. She stopped at the Parks house, scribbled something down, then just stood there staring at their door. She didn't knock, just watched. A chill ran through me. That's when I whispered it, testing the words like they might burn my tongue. This isn't normal. Lying in bed that night, I thought about Danielle again. Her last words ringing in my head like static. You'll never stand up to anyone. That's why I'm leaving. I wanted to shout back, tell her she was wrong, but I hadn't. And now, a stranger, with a clipboard, was rewriting the rules of my life. Was Sharon just overly strict? Or was this something deeper? I didn't know then how right I was to be afraid. Because what happened next would turn my quiet little escape into a battlefield damned me into someone my ex never thought I'd become. That night, I stayed on the porch longer than usual. The lake sat still, like it was holding its breath. I couldn't stop thinking about the way Sharon had looked at me, not angry, not rude, just empty, like she didn't exist unless she was enforcing something. That image stuck with me. Maybe because I'd once felt that way, too lost in the routine, going along with rules just because questioning them was harder. But this was different. This was my home. And something deep in my guts said Sharon wasn't finished. It was a Tuesday morning, around 8 o'clock, when everything fell apart. I stepped out onto the porch in my robe, coffee steaming in my hand, the cool air nipping at my toes, birds chirped, the lake looked like glass. I remember thinking how peaceful it all felt. Then I heard Bill's voice, sharp and tense. "Alex, you need to come see this." His tone cut through the calm like a razor. My stomach twisted. I dropped the coffee splashing across the wood and ran toward him, heart thudding. That's when I saw it. A bright red sign staked right in my yard, angled to face the street like a billboard of betrayal. For sale, urgent, $180,000. I stared at it, stunned, like if I squinted, maybe it would say something else. The plastic sign creaked in the wind. My hands went cold. I looked at Bill. He didn't speak, just watched me like he was witnessing someone receive a terminal diagnosis. Then I noticed them, a middle-aged couple strolling around, pointing at my porch like it was a property tour. The woman measured the front steps. The man snapped photos. "That'll have to go," he said. "We'll do a wraparound deck." I stepped forward. "Excuse me," I said, trying to sound calm. "Can I ask what you're doing on my property?" They turned, smiling like I was the welcome wagon. "Oh, you must be Mr. Thompson," the woman said. "We're the Johnsons. Just paid the deposit to the HOA this morning." My jaw dropped. "Deposit? This place isn't for sale." The man laughed softly, like I'd told a joke. "The HOA president said you'd agreed. Something about relocating to Florida for health reasons." He showed me his phone. "We even saw the contract. Looks pretty legit." They walked right past me like I was scenery. The woman peered through the kitchen window, then casually opened the front door. "Hope you don't mind, we just wanted to get a feel for the space." I froze. She was taking photos of my bookshelf. "Hey, you can't just walk in there," I shouted, stepping after them. The man raised a hand. "Relax, it's covered under Section 14B of the HOA agreement, transitional occupancy access." "Very standard." "What?" I snapped. I never agreed to this. I'm not moving. The woman barely looked up. Of course, you'll have 30 days to vacate, right? That's what the HOA said. My fists clenched. I wanted to scream instead. I grabbed my phone and dialed the one person who might know what was going on. Sharon, she answered immediately. Alex, she said calmly. I was expecting your call. My voice trembled. Why are there people in my house saying they bought it? She sighed. Alex, you broke too many rules. The board had made its move. You can't sell my house, I shouted. It's mine. There was a pause. Not anymore. Click. Just like that. I stared at the phone, as if it could explain what just happened. My legs gave way, and I dropped onto the front step. It felt exactly like when Danielle ended things, when she took half and walked out like I was a chapter she'd finished. I walked inside. The Johnsons were finally gone, but their presence still lingered, fingerprints on everything. The air had changed. It smelled, wrong. Intruded upon. I reached out and touched the corner of my old recliner. The one I'd spent countless nights in, zoning out to bad television, hoping for peace. I glanced at the photo of me and Dad, remembering how my hands trembled when I first hung it, yet I did it anyway. That memory no longer felt like it belonged to me. I passed the kitchen table where I'd cooked my first solo meal. Toast and canned soup, nothing fancy, but it was mine. Now it all felt like it could disappear at any moment. Outside, I noticed neighbors beginning to gather. Mrs. Parks stood behind her car with her 2 kids, as if it could shield them. She looked at me, her face a mix of sympathy and unease. Down the block, a couple sped up their dog walk when passing my place. A woman I didn't recognize stood on her porch. Phone raised, filming. I felt like some kind of exhibit. Or worse. A cautionary tale. Don't cross Sharon, they'd whisper. Look at him. My ears burned. My fists shook, not from fear, but something that almost resembled rage. That night, I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in the dark, listening to the low hum of the fridge. I didn't eat, didn't move. I just stared at the walls, thinking about all the mornings I'd felt safe here now. It felt like I was squatting in someone else's house, just waiting for them to come home and kick me out. Danielle's voice came back, sharp and vivid. You never fight for anything. I had believed her. Worn that label like it was inked on my skin. But now I wasn't sure I could live with that anymore. Through the window, I saw the red sign glowing under the porch light. My home, my life, had been reduced to a transaction. I thought about calling the police, but what could I even say? That I'd been legally wiped away. They'd laugh, or worse, tell me it was all proper, all above board. No, if I wanted to keep what was mine, I'd need to do something else, something bold, something I wasn't used to. That night, I stopped being the guy things happened to. I began thinking like the kind of man who made things happen. Rodriguez didn't even come to the door. I found him sitting in the kitchen, blankly staring at an unplugged microwave like he'd forgotten what it did. On the table was a child's drawing, their old blue house, complete with the porch swing Sharon had ordered removed. I didn't say a word. What could I possibly say to a man who lost his home one fine notice at a time? Mrs. Johnson handed me tea in a chipped mug, decorated with daisies. I nearly laughed. Not marigolds. Daisies. I kept one bulb, she said, holding up a tiny planter like it held memories in soil. I didn't know whether to smile or cry. The next morning, I woke up like I'd been run over. My legs ached, my head throbbed. My stomach twisted every time I looked outside and saw that red for sale sign still stabbed into my lawn, but I knew I couldn't wait for someone else to fix it. If Sharon could wipe my life away with a few signatures, what would stop her from doing it again to someone else? I threw on a hoodie, grabbed a notebook, and started knocking on doors. Even if no one wanted to answer, the first few went badly. One neighbor cracked the door and muttered, "Sorry, Alex, I can't get involved." Then shut it. Another, a guy I used to eat barbecue ribs with at block parties, just shook his head. "Don't bring this to me, man, I've got kids." That one hurt. The silence that followed those rejections hit harder than any insult. It wasn't just fear, it was survival. Sharon had turned our neighborhood into a quiet dictatorship, and no one wanted to be next. I nearly gave up. But then I knocked on Bill's door. Bill opened it without a word and pointed to the worn recliner across from his. We sat in silence until he finally said, "You know, I tried once." "Tried what?" I looked up, fighting back. He rubbed his forehead. "About a year ago. She'll find me $500 for not painting my mailbox the right color for the season." I appealed, sent letters, thought I was brave. He chuckled bitterly. Next month, I had $1,000 in landscaping violations. A couple months later, code enforcement showed up at my door. He paused. "I almost sold my house just to breathe again." He gave me Rodriguez's new address. Said the guy might be willing to talk. I drove across town to a rundown apartment complex that reeked of mold and microwave dinners. Rodriguez answered cautiously, his shoulders tense. But when I said my name, his eyes softened. Inside, the place was crammed. Boxes were stacked like fortifications, the couch sagging in the middle. But on the wall hung framed photos of a little girl with wild curls and a huge smile. "That's Isabella," he said, pride flickering through the exhaustion. "She's 6 now." He handed me a photo, his hands trembled. That Christmas, we stayed up late building her dollhouse. Porch lights were a mess. I burned the turkey, but it was perfect. His smile faded. Then Sharon hit me with violations. Said my door was the wrong shade of blue. $50 a week. I tried to fix it, but every time I did, she found something else. She knew I couldn't keep up. He looked at the photo again. Now she asks why Santa doesn't visit apartments. My throat tightened. I had no words. Mrs. Johnson was in a nursing apartment on the 2nd floor. The hallway smelled like bleach and canned soup. She opened the door and her face lit up briefly. "Oh, Alex, you look tired." Her space was barely bigger than a motel room. Fluorescent lights flickered above beige curtains. Boxes were stacked against every wall, labeled books. Kitchen, guest room. She gestured to a lone rocking chair by the window. "It's the only thing I brought," she said. "My husband made it. Said it had just the right creak for thinking." She brushed her fingers along the armrest like it was sacred. She pulled out an old photo album. Flipping pages delicately, I planted daisies because my granddaughter loved them. Apparently marigolds were regulation. First a warning, then fines. I called the board, no one answered. Then I got 30 days to leave or face legal action. Her voice cracked. "I'm 75, Alex. I don't understand this new way of punishing people." She clutched the album like it was life itself. "I saved this chair. Everything else is in boxes, or gone." I couldn't look at her without feeling like I'd failed. Outside, I sat in my car and gripped the wheel. Part of me wanted to give up. Let the Johnsons take the cabin. Let Sharon win. Who was I trying to be, anyway? Some kind of hero? That wasn't me. I was the guy who signed the divorce papers without a word. The guy who let his rent triple without complaint. But just as I turned the keys, Mrs. Park's name lit up on my phone. I answered. "Alex," she whispered, voice trembling. "I'm scared." She'd gotten a notice that morning. Her trash bins were misaligned. She paused, then said, "I can't afford to move again. My kids don't know what's going on. I don't want them to. Please, don't stop." I looked out the windshield and imagined my home empty, gutted. I pictured Rodriguez's daughter wondering why Santa stopped coming. I saw Mrs. Johnson clutching that chair like it was the last thing anchoring her to life. And I saw myself, a decade older, broken, moving into a tiny apartment with a view of a parking lot, wondering if I could have done something, but didn't. That night, I sat on the porch and watched the water. My reflection stared back like a stranger. I imagined cardboard boxes piled in my kitchen. My recliner gone. That photo of my dad packed away like it didn't matter. The thought made me sick. I stood, clenched my fists, and whispered to the night. Not me, not this time. I didn't know my next move, but I knew I needed to make one, because Sharon wasn't just taking homes, she was stealing peace. And I wasn't going to let her take mine. Continued in next message. I put together a press release filled with phrases like urban renewal, catalyst, and residential equity recalibration. I even responded to a neighbor's email, pretending to be the communications director for LMI, with a paragraph so dense with jargon it made my head spin. We appreciate your inquiry. At this time, public input will be considered through stakeholder forums following the completion of the Phase 1 infrastructure audit. Bill read it and nearly choked on his coffee. What the hell is that even supposed to mean? I smiled. Absolutely nothing. But it sounds terrifying, right? We both laughed. It was the first time I'd seen a flicker of real amusement on his face since this all began. Meanwhile, Sharon was starting to crack. She called Ron twice in a single day. I caught pieces of the second conversation through his kitchen window. I didn't approve any signage, he said sharply. I don't recall agreeing to any development. There was a pause. Maybe you should have brought it to the board before making decisions on your own. After hanging up, he sank into a chair, rubbing his temples slowly. The balance was shifting. Sharon was no longer whispering instructions behind closed doors, she was now scrambling to justify her actions. By Monday, things were unraveling fast. 1. Man stormed down the street, shouting into his phone, I need to know if my mortgage is in danger. What if property values fall? A couple quietly packed their SUV, murmuring, let's list the house before things get worse. The gas station clerk told Bill someone had come in asking where to submit relocation paperwork, and Sharon, she was holed up in her office, surrounded by towering stacks of HOA bylaws, her hands trembling as sticky notes littered the desk like a battlefield. She opened the blinds, then closed them, then opened them again. Her eyes were red. That night, I sat across the lake with binoculars, watching her pace her living room barefoot. Her flawless posture was gone. I whispered into the breeze, now you know how it feels. Then I set the binoculars down, leaned into the shadows, and let the full weight of my plan settle over me. This wasn't over, but for the first time, I wasn't the one being hunted, as I peered through my blinds and watched her storm down the sidewalk. Phone glued to her ear in that frantic power walk, I felt something shift inside. Not revenge, not happiness, just equilibrium. It finally felt like the scales were tipping back. She had no idea what was coming. And this time, I wasn't the one left in the dark. Was it petty? Maybe, but it felt necessary, because fear, once it takes root, grows fast, and I was done letting mine control me. If Sharon wanted a chess game find, I just flipped the board. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, lights off. The only glow came from my laptop screen. I'd created a folder and named it War. Inside it, I dumped everything: screenshots of fines, forwarded neighbor complaints, even a picture of Rodriguez's empty front porch. I didn't know why I was collecting it all. Maybe I was building a case. Maybe I just needed proof it was real. But as I stared at that folder, something hit me. People need to know this kind of thing happens. Not just to me, but to anyone who's ever been bullied by someone with a little authority and too much time on their hands. Didn't know back then I'd end up telling this story. But if you're hearing it now, it means maybe you've lived through something like this too. Maybe you've had your own Sharon dot, and if so, I hope this helps you realize you're not alone. Not anymore. The folding chairs groaned like brittle bones whenever someone shifted. They filled the small community center in uneven rows under humming fluorescent lights. The beige walls were chipped at the corners. A dusty projector rested crooked on a squeaky metal cart. The air smelled faintly of old coffee and carpet. Neighbors trickled in one by one, speaking in hushed tones. A pen dropped. Someone whispered, "Did you hear?" Near the back, a teen recorded quietly with their phone. An elderly man in flannel already looked half asleep. I stood by the doorway, uncertain if I was ready. I told myself I had a plan, that the signs, the website, the whispers, it all led to this. But as soon as I stepped inside, doubt hit me like cold rain. What if they don't believe me? What if I'm wrong? Sharon had ruled this place like a courtroom for years. Most people didn't even think to question her. And if I stood up and failed, I wouldn't just look foolish, I might lose the last shred of courage I'd pieced together. I gripped the back of the chair in front of me, knuckles pale. Please, let the truth count for something. Sharon entered just after 6. Navy pantsuit. Heels clicking across the tile. Clipboard tucked under her arm, she wore that calculated politician's smile, tight and controlled. A few neighbors nodded. Others avoided her gaze. She sat at the front table, surrounded by folders and a pitcher of water. The projector screen behind her glowed blank, flickering slightly. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice smooth and steady. "I want to address the recent rumors regarding a redevelopment project. I can assure you, they're entirely false, meant to create panic." She clicked a remote. A slide popped up, neighborhood value trends. A bar graph, meaningless to most. "As you can see," she continued, "property values have increased steadily. During my time here, there is no credible threat to anyone's home. These signs and websites are fabrications, probably from outside agitators or someone who misinterpreted our process." She took a sip of water. "We're investigating the source, and anyone responsible will be held accountable. This board stands for order." Her confidence hadn't wavered, had grown. She really believed she still had control. Ron sat a few seats down from me. I noticed how often his eyes darted between Sharon and the crumpled paper in his hands. His foot tapped nervously. I remembered how he once told me he'd signed something, trusting her. Now I saw the guilt clouding his expression. Then Sharon paused, and Ron stood up. A quiet beat passed. "Sharon," he said, voice soft but sure. "Last week, you asked me to sign papers you said were for mailbox repairs. I didn't read them. I trusted you." The room froze. Someone gasped. "Now I think maybe you used my name for something else." Sharon's smile faded. "Ron," she said cautiously, "those were basic maintenance authorizations. You've been on the board long enough to understand. The paperwork." Ron shook his head. "I didn't know what I was signing. And now half the neighborhood thinks they're being evicted." Sharon opened her mouth, but the room shifted. A woman stood. "Then who approved all these fines?" Another voice chimed in. "Why did my neighbor move out last month without a word?" The air cracked. Voices rose. Eyes narrowed. People weren't just asking anymore, they were demanding. Rodriguez stepped forward, holding a sheet of paper. "This is a drawing my daughter made," he said. "She drew it on our porch the night before we had to leave." He held it up. Crayon lines, a stick figure family, a small blue house with heart-shaped windows. "Sharon fined us until we couldn't breathe. We lost our home. My daughter lost her home. You tell me how that helps property values." His voice broke. The room went silent. Then Mrs. Johnson rose, pulling a small wedding photo from her purse. "This is me and my husband in front of our garden," she said. "That garden's gone. The house is gone. All because I planted daisies instead of marigolds." Her hands trembled. "I'm 75. I couldn't afford a lawyer. I lost everything." She held out the photo like evidence. No one spoke. Even the teenager with the phone had stopped filming. Sharon stiffened, reaching for her papers. But as she stood, the stack slipped from her arms and scattered across the floor. Not a single person moved to help. I stood slowly. My heart beat like a drum in my chest. The silence was thick, like it was waiting. I looked around. Rodriguez clutched his daughter's drawing like a shield. Mrs. Johnson held her photo as if it could protect her. My throat tightened. I opened my mouth, then closed it. What if I said the wrong thing? What if they turned on me? But then I saw Mrs. Park in the back, holding her son's hand, tears brimming in her eyes. That was enough. "I have something to say," I said, voice unsteady. "Created the fake development project not to scare anyone, but to make people feel what it's like to live in fear of losing your home." Murmurs rose. I stepped forward, because 3 weeks ago, Sharon sold my cabin without warning. Said I broke too many rules, and I'm not the only one. She'll find people into silence, crushed complaints, and used Ron's name to push things through without consent. I locked eyes with her. You built your power on silence, Sharon. She stared at me shaken now. We just stopped being quiet. The room held its breath in that moment. I knew this wasn't finished, but the momentum had shifted. And Sharon knew it too. After the meeting, no one said much. People filed out quietly, some in tears, some shaking their heads. Sharon didn't look back. She just walked away, jid and fast, like slowing down might shatter her. I stood beside Rodriguez and Mrs. Johnson, the heavy silence wrapping around us. It wasn't victory. It wasn't over. It was that stillness after a storm, when the clouds begin to clear, but the ground is still wet. We'd exposed her, but the reckoning hadn't even begun. What happens after justice? After you finally win? Later that night, I sat in my dark cabin. The fridge hummed in the background. My journal lay open with a pen, untouched. I opened my phone, hit record, and whispered, "What happens after justice? After you finally win?" My voice sounded distant, detached. Why does it still feel like nothing's changed? I let the silence answer. Sharon's house stood like a mausoleum. Grass crept over the walkway. The windows were always shut, blinds sealed tight. No tulips, no flags, just emptiness. Someone slipped a typed note into her mailbox last week. Justice tastes bitter, doesn't it? No name, just ink and retribution. Word spread that she'd been turned away at Brookside Market. Cashiers wouldn't make eye contact. Baggers found reasons to walk off. A neighbor swore she saw Sharon frozen in the dairy aisle, holding a gallon of milk with tears in her eyes. Someone else claimed birdseed was dumped on her windshield with a note, "Feed pigeons, not your ego." The mob didn't wear hoods now. They just hit send, or looked away. 3 days later, I saw her at Mitchell's Market. I was picking up coffee and frozen peas when I spotted her alone in the checkout line. The woman in front glanced back, then switched registers. The cashier's smile faded. Hands trembled. Then she noticed me. Her lips moved before sound came. I brought order to chaos. "Now there's just mud," she whispered. I stood there, unsure. "You gave control," I said, "to fear." She nodded slowly, not angry, just hollow. When the police knocked, it wasn't loud. Just a calm tap. My palms went slick. Had I gone too far? I opened the door. 2 officers stood there. One older, clipboard in hand, the other younger, uncertain. "Mr. Reed," the tall one said, "we're following up on some questionable filings, HOA, land transfers, citations, property records. May we come in?" I nodded. "I've documented everything," I said, voice shaking. I showed them the binder. The younger officer asked carefully, "Did you take any money from these development plans?" "No, never." "Did you offer property to outside buyers?" "No. It was a staged company, meant to expose abuse. That's it." They exchanged glances. Then the older one smirked. "You'd be surprised what people do to dodge HOA fines." "I wouldn't," I said. I lived it. After an hour of questions, they thanked me for my time as they left. The younger one paused. "My aunt got fined $200 for putting a wind chime too close to a fence. HOA's man. They start with a smile and end with a summons." Later that evening, someone knocked. A stranger. Rough hands, tired eyes. He said his name was Marquesa, single dad, trying to buy a house nearby. "I almost sealed the deal on one just down the block," he said. "But after the chaos your pretend development stirred up, the bank pulled the plug. Said there was too much instability." My gut sank. "I didn't mean," he raised a hand, cutting me off. "Next time you want to make a point, maybe don't set everyone else's plans on fire." I offered a sincere apology. He gave a nod, no smile. But the consequences of what I'd done didn't stop with him. Bill and Rodriguez started something, a neighborhood group. They held their first meeting at the park, beneath glowing strings of lights. Around 20 people came. Rodriguez brought iced tea. Bill passed out flyers. They named it the New Neighbors Coalition. First order of business, Revise the HOA charter to keep power in check. 2 days later, an email landed in my inbox. It was from a woman named Karen Tron, a lawyer with a group called Fair Communities United. We assist people experiencing HOA overreach, she wrote. We heard about your actions. If you need legal backup, we're here. An unexpected army was forming behind me. One evening, Ron came to my porch with a sealed envelope in hand. She wrote this 6 months ago, he said. Before everything went down, gave it to the board. Nobody opened it. Inside was a typed letter, Sharon's words. A proposal: lower the fines, allow appeals, open public comments before citations were issued. It was dated 3 months before she tried to sell my place. She used to cry at night, Ron murmured. Said the rules were the only thing that made her feel respected. I read that letter over and over. Had this been her plan all along? Or a final attempt to hold on? That night I sat by the lake, the letter in my hands like it might ignite. The moon shimmered across the surface. I thought about every voice, Mrs. Johnson, Marcus, Sharon, even mine. And I asked the night a question. Could you forgive the hand that nearly stole your home? If that hand just wanted to feel in control of something, it began with a single screw. Bill walked up to the HOA office, holding a cordless drill, and removed the top left bolt from the lakeside. Neighborhood Authority sign. No words, just the hum of justice. Then Mrs. Park joined, recording on her phone. Then Rodriguez. Then the new guy from Lot 9. By sunset, the whole sign had come down. No one intervened. Sharon peeked through her blinds like she was watching her own funeral. The video hit 600 shares on the community board in 3 hours. The caption read, "Power built on fear collapses quicker than it rises." The sun crept in softly, lighting the floorboards of my cabin, one beam at a time. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, fingers brushing the faded groove on the armrest where my ex once knocked over a lamp in the middle of an argument. Time had worn it smooth. Outside, the lake gleamed, like it didn't remember a single lie. I breathed deep and whispered into the silence. Still here. The world hadn't flipped overnight. But something had shifted. A local paper ran a full-page article. Fake development project exposes HOA corruption ring. They used a photo of my cabin, sun flaring behind the roof. Just below it, a blurry shot of Sharon head bowed, handcuffed. My name appeared in bold in the second paragraph. They called me a whistleblower. I wasn't sure that's what I was. More like a man who finally stopped swallowing his anger. A week later, a podcast producer emailed me. Civil Voices. They were covering stories of small-town abuse of power. Wanted to hear mine. I recorded the interview in one sitting, right there in the cabin, crickets buzzing outside. When the host asked, "What pushed you to fight back?" I said, "When someone puts a for sale sign on your porch, you either pack up or pull it down." The town organized something called Reclaim the Lake Day. Bill handed me a flyer at the general store. I expected a quiet picnic. Instead, there were banners across the community board. Homes are for healing, not hoarding control. Kids ran wild with sidewalk chalk, drawing cabins and stick figure neighbors hand in hand. Someone handed me a paintbrush and asked, "Want to help touch up the bulletin board?" I said sure. Sharon hadn't disappeared. Word spread that before her court date, she mailed handwritten letters to everyone in the neighborhood. Ron gave me mine without a word, a plain white envelope. I stood there for a long time before opening it. Her handwriting was small, but pointed. "I tried to build walls to block the pain," she wrote. "I ended up locking myself inside. I'm sorry." I stared at the paper. For a second, I wanted to throw it in the fire pit. But I didn't. I folded it neatly and slid it into the back of a drawer. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I didn't want to forget either. Sharon wasn't some villain, just someone who believed control would protect her from breaking. We all wear our armor. Later that night, I sat by the window, remembering all the times I stayed quiet. The HR meeting where they told me my role was no longer needed. I nodded and left. The years of listening to friends unload their problems without ever asking how I was doing. The courtroom, the judge's eyes, the divorce never even said she left first. But when I saw that red-lettered sign on my porch, something inside finally stood up. Not this time, not my home, not my peace. Healing found its way into others too. Mrs. Johnson sent me a photo of her new apartment. Behind her smile was a clay pot on the windowsill, yellow flowers blooming. She misnamed them chrysanthemums again. I didn't correct her. That flower didn't need the right name to grow. Rodriguez invited me over one morning. His daughter had drawn plans for a Twitter house. He was building it, piece by piece. He showed me the frame with proud hands. Said she wanted a slide. So, we're giving her a slide, he laughed. I saw Mrs. Park tending her tomato plants again. She looked up, smiled, handed me a jar of kimchi, like always. You saved us, she said gently. I shook my head. No. I just reminded people they weren't alone. There was no parade, no confetti, but the neighborhood was changing. Rules rewritten, fences removed. Someone hung wind chimes from a porch that used to be silent. A teenager painted a mural on his shed lake cabin, the word stay. The podcast episode aired a few weeks later. I listened once. My voice sounded different, stronger, but warm. They layered in the soft splash of lake water behind my words. I turned it off halfway. I didn't need to hear the end. One morning, the lake was still as glass. I launched my little boat from the dock and paddled out slowly. The only thing I brought was an old wooden yardstick, Sharon's go-to enforcement tool. I held it up to the light, saw the faded markings. 6 inches, 12 inches. How many citations had started with this stick? Out in the center, I paused. The air was clean. No engines, no commands, just breath. I whispered. Some rules deserve to be buried. Then I let go. It hit the water softly, floated for a second, then sank. I watched until the last ripple disappeared. Then turned the boat back toward land, toward home. And in that moment, with the sun overhead and the lake calm, I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt free. Now, when I sit on my porch, the lake feels like mine again. Not because I fought harder than Sharon, but because I finally stood up. People wave when they pass. Kids ride bikes without glancing over their shoulders. Sharon's house is still there, but quiet. No clipboards, no tape measures, just silence. I don't know what next year holds. Maybe another Sharon shows up. Maybe not. But I know this. I'll never be the one who stays silent again. You want to know the strangest part? After all that, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt accountable. Like I should have spoken sooner. But hey, better late than forever silent. They say quiet folks don't make waves. I say, when we finally speak, we don't whisper, we tear down walls. And the truth is, it never really ends, does it? The names and rules change, but there's always someone ready to turn fear into policy and authority into a weapon. That's why I keep the binder. The one with all the photos, letters, fines. Not out of anger. Just to remember, because forgetting is how it begins again. Sometimes I hear a car slow near Sharon's old place. Someone points at her porch and I wonder, do they know what happened here? Or are they already counting fence boards and measuring setbacks? Either way, we'll be ready. Because when we finally speak, we don't whisper, we tear down walls. Maybe that was the point of all this. Not revenge. Not even justice. Just finally making noise loud enough to be heard. It didn't solve everything, but it cracked the silence. And sometimes, that's enough. Maybe the real takeaway is this. If the game's rigged, you don't wait for an invitation to flip the table. If you made it this far, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment. Share your own Sharon story or just say hello. And if this resonated with you, feel free to tap the little thanks button below. No pressure. Just helps keep these stories alive. Thanks for sticking around. Catch you in the next one.